The world had shrunk to the size of my apartment. For walls, a window that looked out onto Mrs. Gable's prize-winning petunias, and a door that remained shut most days. My life was a series of quiet, predictable loops. Wake, work, eat, sleep. I was an architectural illustrator, a job that required a steady hand and an obsessive eye for detail, skills I'd honed to a fine point, while letting the broader strokes of my own life go blurry and unattended. For 2 years, since Marcus had left, my existence had been a grayscale drawing waiting for color. I told myself I preferred the quiet. I told myself it was peaceful. Most of the time, I was a very convincing liar. The mail became an event. It was the one part of my day that was not entirely under my control, a small, scheduled intrusion from the outside world. I knew the hum of the truck before it turned onto our street, the specific squeak of its brakes, the rhythmic clink-clank of the community mailbox lids being opened and shut. And for the past 6 months, I knew the man who delivered it. He was just the mailman at first, a peripheral figure in a blue uniform. But you notice things when your world is small. I noticed the way he moved, with an economy of motion that spoke of quiet confidence. He didn't rush, but he was never slow. He had broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his uniform shirt and dark hair that curled just a little at the nape of his neck, where the summer sun had lightened it. I learned the sound of his footsteps on the concrete path, a solid, even tread that was somehow reassuring. I never spoke to him beyond a nod if our paths happened to cross. He would offer a small, polite smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. They were a startlingly clear shade of hazel, something I only knew because I'd once been caught staring from my window as he handed a package to Mrs. Gable. He'd glanced up, his smile not faltering, and for a moment, I felt seen. It was terrifying. Then came the envelope. It wasn't junk mail, and it wasn't a bill. It was thick, cream-colored, with a stern, official-looking return address from a law firm I didn't recognize. And scrawled across the front in unforgiving red ink were the words, "Signature required." I knew, with a sinking certainty that settled like cold sludge in my stomach, what it was. Marcus was done waiting for me to engage. He was forcing the finality, putting a pen in my hand, and demanding I sign away the last 8 years of my life. I let it sit on the counter for a day, then another. I'd see it from the corner of my eye while making coffee, a pale rectangle of judgment. On the 3rd day, a pink slip appeared in my mailbox. Final notice. I had to go to the post office or it would be returned to sender, an act of passive-aggressive avoidance that even I knew was a new low. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. So, I waited, knowing it would come back around, knowing he would have to try one more time. It was a Tuesday when he came. The air was thick with the promise of a thunderstorm, the sky a bruised purple-gray. I heard his steps on the walkway, and my heart began a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. The doorbell chimed, a sound so rare it felt like a violation. I stood frozen in my hallway, every muscle tight. It chimed again, longer this time. I finally forced my legs to move, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. I opened it just a crack. He was standing there, the formidable envelope in one hand and a digital scanner in the other. He looked different up close. Taller. There were fine lines around his eyes, and a faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He smelled of rain and clean laundry. "Leo Vance," he asked. His voice was lower than I'd imagined, a calm baritone that did nothing to soothe the frantic hummingbird in my chest. I just nodded, unable to form words. He offered a small, sympathetic smile. It didn't feel condescending. It felt knowing. "Got a signature required for you." He held out the scanner. The screen glowed with a single, damning line for my name. This was it. The legal severing. The final, undeniable end. My hand was shaking so badly I couldn't take the stylus from him. I just stared at the screen, at the empty space where my name was supposed to go. This single action felt heavier than anything I had ever done. It was an admission of failure, an autograph on the certificate of my own broken heart. My breath hitched. The edges of my vision started to go fuzzy. "Hey," he said softly. His voice cut through the static in my head. "It's all right. Just breathe." I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw something beyond professional courtesy in his gaze. It was concern. Genuine, unvarnished concern. He was looking at me, really looking at me, and he wasn't looking away. He saw the panic, the fear, the utter paralysis. He took a small step closer. The air between us became charged, thick with the unsaid. He didn't say another word. Instead, he gently took the scanner from my nerveless fingers and set it on the small porch railing beside us. Then, he reached out and his hand, warm and calloused and surprisingly steady, covered mine. The contact was like a lightning strike, a jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation that shot up my arm and grounded me to the spot. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't try to force the stylus back into my hand. He didn't tell me to hurry up. He just stood there, his warmth seeping into my cold skin, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling vortex of my anxiety. He held my gaze, his hazel eyes searching mine. And in that moment, under the bruised and heavy sky, with the scent of ozone in the air, a complete stranger held my hand and told me, without a single word, that it was okay to fall apart. That was the first time I truly saw Julian. He eventually had to leave, of course. The storm broke, and he had a route to finish. He'd picked up the scanner, and I'd managed a shaky, illegible scrawl on the screen. He'd handed me the envelope of doom, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second too long. "Take care of yourself, Leo," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm. Then he was gone, his steady footsteps retreating down the path, leaving me clutching the legal instrument of my own undoing, my hand still tingling where his had been. I didn't open it. I couldn't. The envelope went into a drawer, a ticking time bomb I was determined to ignore. But I couldn't ignore Julian. He had become a fixed point in my day, a landmark in the barren landscape of my routine. I started listening for the truck with a new kind of attention, a nervous anticipation that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. My work, which had been my only refuge, now seemed like an obstacle, keeping me chained to my desk when I wanted to be by the window. I began to orchestrate small, seemingly accidental encounters. I'd suddenly need to take out the trash at exactly 11:42 a.m. Or I'd remember a pressing need to check on the wilting ferns on my porch just as his truck rumbled to a stop. Each time, it was the same. A brief exchange, a polite nod. But something had shifted between us since that day on the porch. The air was different. His smiles weren't just polite anymore. They lingered. They reached his eyes, making those little crinkles at the corners deepen. He started calling me by my name. "Morning, Leo." The two words, spoken in his low, calm voice, were enough to send a ridiculous flutter through my stomach. I'd mumble a greeting in return, my face hot, and then spend the next hour replaying the interaction, dissecting his tone, the angle of his head, the way his eyes had held mine for a second longer than necessary. I was an observer by nature and by profession, and I turned my full, obsessive attention onto Julian. I learned the rhythm of his work. He was meticulous, placing each piece of mail squarely in the box, never just stuffing it in. He had a soft spot for the neighborhood dogs, always carrying a few treats in his pocket. He'd crouch down and speak to them in a low, gentle voice, scratching them behind the ears. He was patient with the elderly Mr. Henderson next door, who liked to talk his ear off about his wartime experiences. Julian would stand and listen, nodding, never looking at his watch, giving the old man his complete, undivided attention. He was a man defined by small acts of care, and I, who had felt so profoundly uncared for, found myself captivated. One afternoon, I was struggling to carry a large, flat-packed bookcase into my house. It was awkward and heavy, and I was making a fool of myself, shuffling and grunting in the driveway. Just as I was about to give up and let it crash to the ground, a shadow fell over me. "Need a hand with that." It was Julian. He'd finished his route on my street and was walking back to his truck. He wasn't in his official capacity. He was just a man, his uniform shirt slightly untucked, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "Oh, no, I've got it," I lied, my pride stinging. He raised a skeptical eyebrow, the one with the little scar. A ghost of a smirk played on his lips. "You sure about that? Looks like the box is winning." My face flushed. "It's just awkward." Without another word, he walked to the other end of the box. "I'll take this side. On 3. 1, 2, 3" he lifted, and suddenly my end felt weightless. We navigated the doorway together, a clumsy, shuffling dance into my living room. The space felt instantly smaller with him in it. He filled it with an energy, a vitality that had been absent for years. He smelled like sunshine and hard work. "Where do you want it?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the sparsely furnished room. Just here is fine, I managed, and we lowered the box to the floor. An awkward silence fell between us. My living room had never felt so bare, so revealing. It was a room that screamed lonely, with its single armchair, its empty walls, its neat, sterile surfaces. I suddenly saw it through his eyes and was mortified. Thanks, I said, my voice too loud. I really appreciate it. Can I get you a glass of water or something? He looked around the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on the drafting table in the corner, covered in my precise, black and white drawings. This is what you do? He asked, nodding toward it. Yeah, I'm an architectural illustrator. Figures, he said, a small smile on his face. You've got the eyes for it. I had no idea what that meant, but it made my heart do a stupid little flip. The eyes for it. Detail, he said simply. You notice things. He turned his full attention back to me, and his gaze was so direct, so intense, it felt like a physical touch. I'll take that water, if you're still offering. I practically fled to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I filled a glass. My mind was racing. He's in my house. Julian is in my house. When I came back, he was standing in front of my drafting table, studying a drawing of a Victorian house I'd just finished. He was so close I could see the individual threads in the blue fabric of his shirt, could count the faint freckles on the back of his neck. I handed him the water, and our fingers brushed. It was the barest of contacts, a whisper of skin against skin, but it sent a shock wave through me. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't react, just took a long drink of water, his throat working. He watched me over the rim of the glass, his hazel eyes unreadable. This is good work, he said, gesturing to the drawing with the glass. Really precise. Thanks, I was running out of words. My entire vocabulary seemed to have deserted me, leaving only a jumble of anxieties. He finished the water and set the empty glass on a coaster on my side table. A perfect, considerate gesture that somehow made me even more flustered. Well, he said, heading for the door. I should let you get to your construction project. Right? Yeah, thanks again. He paused at the open door, one hand on the frame, and looked back at me. The afternoon sun backlit him, creating a halo effect around his dark hair. Anytime, Leo, and then he smiled. It wasn't the polite mailman smile or the amused smirk. It was a real, genuine smile, wide and warm, and it completely transformed his face. He left, and I stood in the middle of my silent living room, my skin buzzing. The empty glass sat on the coaster, proof that he had been there, that it wasn't just some lonely daydream. The whole encounter had lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it had irrevocably altered the space. He had brought the outside world in, and I realized, with a terrifying jolt, that I didn't want it to leave. The next day it rained. A miserable, persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of the world and matched the gray mood inside my house. I was trying to work, but my focus was shot. My mind kept replaying every second of Julian's visit. The way he'd lifted the box with effortless strength. The sound of his voice in my living room. The warmth of his gaze as he'd looked at my drawings. And that smile. That damn smile. I heard the mail truck, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. A part of me, the cowardly part, wanted to hide. But a stronger, more reckless part propelled me to the door. I opened it just as he was jogging up the path, a stack of mail tucked under his arm to shield it from the rain. He was wearing a waterproof jacket, the hood pulled down, his hair dark and damp around his face. Morning, he said, a little breathlessly. He handed me my mail, and I saw that he'd put my letters inside a large plastic bag to keep them dry. Another small act of care. It made my chest ache. Thanks for this, I said, holding up the protected mail. No problem. It's coming down pretty good out here. He looked past me, into my house. Get your bookcase built. Not yet, I admitted. I'm still staring at the instructions. They look like they were written in another language. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. Yeah, they can be like that. An impulse, wild and uncharacteristically bold, seized me. You don't happen to read that language, do you? The words were out before I could stop them. My face was on fire. I was sure he'd laugh, or make an excuse and leave. I was asking the mailman to help me with my furniture. It was absurd. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. The rain dripped from the brim of his jacket. I get off in a couple of hours, he said, his voice even. I could swing by after, if you want. I'm pretty good with that stuff. I was stunned into silence. He was actually saying yes. You don't have to, I stammered. It was a stupid thing to ask. I'm sorry. It wasn't stupid, he said, and his directness was a physical force. I'll be back around 4. If that's okay. All I could do was nod. See you at 4, Leo. He gave me another one of those small, knowing smiles and jogged back to his truck, leaving me standing in my doorway, drenched in a mixture of rain and disbelief. I had a date. It wasn't a date, of course. It was a furniture building appointment, but it felt like the most significant event of my entire year. He arrived at 4 o'clock on the dot, not in his uniform, but in a faded gray t-shirt and jeans. The shirt clung to his shoulders and chest, and I tried very hard not to stare. He looked younger without the uniform, more relaxed. He was carrying a small toolbox. Ready to do battle? He asked, stepping inside and shaking the rain from his hair. For the next 2 hours, we worked. He was, as promised, very good with that stuff. He laid out all the pieces with a methodical calm that I envied, deciphering the cryptic diagrams with ease. I became his assistant, handing him screws, holding pieces in place. We didn't talk much at first, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the small sounds of our task, the rip of plastic packaging, the clink of metal, the whir of the Allen key. He worked with a quiet competence that was mesmerizing. His hands were strong and capable, turning screws with practiced efficiency. I found myself watching them, the way his knuckles flexed, the dusting of dark hair on his forearms. I was so lost in my observation that I almost missed his question. So, what's the story with all the empty walls? He asked, not looking up from his task. The question caught me off guard. What? The walls, he repeated, gesturing with his head. You're an artist, but you don't have anything up. Just curious. I felt a flush of defensiveness. I just moved in, I lied. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. His hazel eyes were unervingly perceptive. You've been here for 2 years, Leo. My mouth went dry. How did he know that? Of course he knew that. He delivered my mail. He'd probably delivered Marcus's mail, too. He'd seen the transition from 2 names on the box to just 1. He knew more about my life than I'd ever realized. The thought made me feel exposed, vulnerable. It just hasn't felt like mine yet, I finally said, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. It was the most honest thing I'd said to anyone in a long time. Julian nodded slowly, his gaze softening. He didn't press. He didn't offer platitudes. He just accepted my answer and went back to work. But in that moment of shared, unspoken understanding, a wall I hadn't even known was there began to crumble. He had seen a piece of my brokenness, my stagnation, and he hadn't run away. He'd simply tightened another screw. When the bookcase was finished, standing tall and steady against the wall, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over me. We had made something. Together. It was the first new thing in this house in a very long time. There, he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. All done. It's perfect, I said, and I meant it. Thank you, Julian. I don't know how to thank you. I fumbled for my wallet, but he put a hand on my arm to stop me. His touch was firm, warm. Don't, he said. I was happy to help. But you could buy me a pizza. I'm starving. And just like that, he had effortlessly extended our time together, turning a favor into a shared meal. We sat on the floor of my living room, eating pizza out of the box, the new bookcase standing like a silent sentinel beside us. The rain had stopped, and the evening light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. He told me about his life. He'd grown up in a small town a few hours away. He'd wanted to be a park ranger, but life had gotten in the way. He didn't complain about it. He just stated it as a fact. He talked about his love for hiking, for the quiet of the woods. He asked me about my work, and he listened, really listened, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was genuinely interested. He never once mentioned the envelope. He never asked about Marcus or why my house felt like a waiting room. He just met me where I was, on the floor of my empty living room, and shared a pizza with me. As he was leaving, he paused at the door again, just as he had the day before. The habit was starting to feel significant. You should put some of your drawings up, he said quietly. This place needs some color. It needs some of you in it. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression serious. It's your house, Leo. Time to claim it. After he left, the silence of the apartment felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the echo of his voice, the scent of cardboard and pepperoni, the solid presence of the new bookcase. I walked over to it and ran my hand along the smooth, particle-board surface. It was real. He was real. I went to my drafting table and pulled out a few of my favorite drawings, a detailed study of a lighthouse, a whimsical sketch of a treehouse, a stark rendering of a city skyline. I found an old box of thumbtacks and, one by one, I pinned them to the wall above the new bookcase. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He was right. It was time to claim it. The days that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm, a rhythm that included Julian. Our daily mail exchange became a brief, charged moment we both looked forward to. The conversations grew longer, spilling over from polite greetings into actual snippets of our lives. He'd tell me about a funny thing that happened on his route. I'd show him a drawing I was working on. We were building a fragile bridge, one small talk at a time. The bookcase became a repository for things other than books. A smooth stone he'd found on a hike and given to me. A paperback he'd finished and thought I might like. Small offerings. Tokens of a growing connection that was still too new, too undefined, to name. But the envelope was still in the drawer. A silent, nagging reminder of the life I was supposed to be dismantling. Every time I saw Julian, a fresh wave of guilt and fear would wash over me. What was I doing? I was in a state of legal and emotional limbo, a man half divorced, half haunted. I had no right to be feeling this, whatever it was, for my mailman. The law firm sent another one. I knew the moment I saw it in Julian's hand. The same creamy, thick stock. The same air of stern importance. My stomach plummeted. He walked up the path, his face unreadable. He wasn't smiling today. He held out the envelope and the scanner. Another one for you, Leo. The air crackled with the memory of the last time we had stood like this. My hand was shaking again, but for a different reason. It wasn't just panic this time. It was a deep, aching shame. I felt like a fraud. He had been in my house, helped me build my furniture, shared a meal with me. And all the while, I was hiding this ugly, unresolved piece of my past. I took the stylus, but my fingers were slick with sweat. I couldn't look at him. I stared at the glowing screen, at the line where I was supposed to sign my name and acknowledge that I was still broken. I felt his presence beside me, closer than necessary. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I risked a glance at him. He was watching my hand, his jaw tight. "You don't have to sign it if you're not ready," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have to," I choked out. "They'll just keep sending them." "So let them," he said, his gaze flicking from my hand to my face. "It's just paper, Leo." But it wasn't just paper. It was a symbol of my failure, my paralysis. And he was standing here, a beacon of quiet strength and competence, witnessing it all. I felt a hot tear spill over and trace a path down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, mortified. And then it happened. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and his hand covered mine again. It wasn't gentle and tentative like the first time. It was firm, possessive, a definitive claim. His fingers wrapped around mine, stilling their trembling. The stylus was trapped between our palms. His thumb came up to rest on my pulse point, feeling the frantic, rabbit-fast beat. "Breathe," he commanded softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through his hand into mine. I obeyed, dragging in a shaky breath. He held my gaze, his own eyes dark and intense. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the heat of his hand on mine, to the shared air we were breathing. He didn't speak. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking my wrist in a slow, soothing rhythm. He was waiting, giving me a moment to find my footing. But I was so lost. The document in his other hand represented my past. His hand on mine it felt like a possible future. And I was trapped between them, unable to move. I am here. Now. My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. Julian's hand is a warm, heavy weight on mine, an anchor in a storm I didn't know I was still in. His eyes, those impossible hazel eyes, are searching mine for something, and I don't know what he'll find. All I know is the feeling of his skin against mine, the way his thumb is making slow, deliberate circles on my wrist. The world has gone silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. He shifts his weight, leaning in ever so slightly. The clean, rain and laundry scent of him fills my senses. He doesn't look at the scanner. He doesn't look at the envelope. He only looks at me. His gaze is so intense, so focused, it feels like he can see every cracked and broken piece of me. And he is not looking away. With his hand still firmly covering mine, he uses his other hand to pick up a stray leaf that has blown onto the porch railing. He holds it out on his palm. It's a simple, perfect maple leaf, tinged with the first blush of autumn. Then, still holding my hand, he gently guides it, our hands moving as one. He doesn't guide it toward the scanner. He guides it toward the leaf. He presses my index finger, still sheathed by his, onto the delicate, veined surface of the leaf. A silent, absurdly gentle act of redirection. He is showing me something else to touch. Something real, something natural, something that isn't a legal demand. He is guiding my hand away from the signature line of my past and asking me to feel the texture of the present. My breath catches in my throat. This is it. This is the moment where everything changes. It's not about the mail anymore. It's not about a favor or being neighborly. This is intentional. This is a statement. He is holding my hand, controlling my hand, and using it to make me pay attention. To him. To now. He finally breaks the silence, his voice a low, rough whisper that is meant only for me. Sign that later, he says. Or don't. But right now, look at me. I do. I look up from our joined hands, from the ridiculous, beautiful leaf, and I meet his eyes. The world falls away. There is no porch, no mail, no threat of rain. There is only him. The unwavering steadiness in his gaze. The faint, questioning tilt of his head. The almost imperceptible softening of his lips. He had taken my hand to stop me from signing a document of closure, and in its place, he was guiding me to sign on to something else entirely. Something terrifying and new. Something that felt, inexplicably, like hope. He let go of my hand, and the sudden absence of his warmth was a physical shock. He picked up the scanner. I have to mark it as recipient refused for now, he said, his voice back to its professional, even tone, but his eyes told a different story. They were still locked on mine, dark and serious. I couldn't speak. I just watched as he tapped a few times on the screen. He held the dreaded envelope out to me. I took it, our fingers brushing for a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal. I get off at 3 today, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, an offering. Okay, I whispered, the single word a monumental effort. I'm going for a walk at the reservation. The trails will be quiet. He paused, letting the invitation hang in the air between us. You should come. Then he turned and walked away, his stride as steady and confident as ever, leaving me on the porch with an unsigned legal document in one hand and a fragile, terrifying invitation weighing on my heart. He hadn't asked me if I was okay. He hadn't pitied me. He had seen my paralysis and, instead of trying to fix it, had simply offered me a different path to walk on. I spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. I put the envelope in the drawer with its twin. I tried to work, but the lines on the paper blurred. My mind was a chaotic landscape of fear and a wild, unfamiliar surge of something that felt like courage. He wants to see me, outside of this context, away from this house and his uniform. At 2:45, I was standing in front of my closet, my heart hammering. What does one wear to a non-date walk with their mailman who just held their hand in a profoundly intimate way? It was a question for which I had no answer. I settled on jeans and a plain black t-shirt, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. I drove to the nature reservation, my hands slick on the steering wheel. I was sure he wouldn't be there. I was sure I had imagined the whole thing, the intensity in his eyes, the weight of his hand. It was just a lonely man's fantasy, a story I'd spun around a kind stranger. But he was there. He was leaning against a dusty pickup truck that I'd never seen before, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a faded green Henley and worn-in work boots. He looked different, solid, real, a man, not a uniform. He pushed off the truck as I approached, a slow smile spreading across his face. Hey, he said, I was starting to think you'd bail. I thought about it, I admitted, my voice shaky. Glad you didn't. His smile reached his eyes, and the knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened just a little. Ready? We walked into the woods. The trail was narrow, carpeted with pine needles that muffled our footsteps. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy of leaves, dappling the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. For a long time, We walked in silence. It wasn't the awkward, tense silence of my living room. It was a comfortable, companionable quiet, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill the space with noise. Julian walked with an easy, familiar gait, his hands in his pockets. He seemed completely at home here, his shoulders relaxed, his posture open. He was in his element, and I was the one who felt out of place. "This is my favorite place," he said finally, his voice low. "When things get too loud, I come here." "What things?" I asked, my curiosity overriding my shyness. He shrugged, his gaze on the path ahead. "Just life. The noise. People's expectations. My own." He glanced at me. "You know?" And I did. I knew exactly what he meant. My entire life felt like it was dictated by the noise of other people's expectations. Marcus's, my parents', society's, and now, the insistent, demanding noise of a law firm. "My life is very quiet," I said. "Maybe too quiet." "There's a difference between quiet and silent," he said, his insight so sharp it made me flinch. "Quiet is peaceful. Silent is empty." He had just summed up the last 2 years of my existence in a single sentence. We walked on, the weight of his words settling between us. He had seen right through me, not just my paralysis on the porch, but the deeper, more profound emptiness I lived in. We came to a small clearing with a wooden bench overlooking a stream. We sat, leaving a respectable distance between us. The only sound was the gurgle of the water over the rocks. "I shouldn't have done that today," he said, breaking the silence. He was staring at the stream, his profile outlined against the green of the woods. "On your porch." It wasn't professional. My heart sank. He regretted it. "It's okay." He turned to look at me then, his expression serious. "No, it's not. But I'm not sorry I did it." He held my gaze. "I've wanted to. I've been watching you for a while, Leo. Not just as a guy on my route. I saw you. You looked lost. And I guess I couldn't stand by and watch you sign something that was clearly breaking your heart." My breath hitched. He had seen it all. The sadness, the loneliness, the fear. He'd seen it, and he hadn't been repulsed. He'd stepped closer. "Why?" I whispered. "Why do you care?" He looked down at his hands, then back at me. A faint flush crept up his neck. "Because," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "I think I'm starting to feel things for the lost guy on my route. And that's probably not professional either." The confession hung in the air, as real and tangible as the bench we were sitting on. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. My mind, my overthinking, analytical mind, shut down. For the first time in forever, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. And what I felt was a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief. I wasn't crazy. The lingering looks, the small touches, the extra kindness, it had all meant something. I wasn't just a lonely man projecting his hopes onto a handsome stranger. This is real. This man, this kind, steady, perceptive man, is sitting next to me, telling me he has feelings for me. My heart, which I thought had atrophied from disuse, started a slow, powerful beat. A warmth spread through my chest, a feeling so foreign I could barely identify it. It was hope. Raw, terrifying, beautiful hope. I had to say something. I couldn't let this moment pass. I couldn't retreat back into my shell of silence. "I think," I started, my voice raspy with emotion, "that the lost guy on your route is starting to feel things back." A slow smile spread across Julian's face. It was like watching the sun rise. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. Yeah, I confirmed, a shaky smile touching my own lips. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for me. He just held my gaze, his eyes full of a warmth that enveloped me completely. The space between us was no longer a chasm of polite distance. It was a space charged with potential, humming with everything that was now possible. "So," he said, his voice a little rough, "what do we do now?" "I have no idea," I said, and for the first time, the not knowing didn't feel like a terrifying void. It felt like an open door. He leaned back on the bench, a look of contentment on his face. "Good," he said. "I like not knowing." We sat there for a long time, watching the water flow, not speaking. We didn't need to. The most important things had already been said. In the quiet of the woods, away from the demands of the world, something new had been given a space to breathe. It was fragile, yes, but it was there, and it was real. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden rays through the trees, I felt the truth of it settle deep in my bones. I had come to these woods feeling lost. But sitting here, next to Julian, I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I was finally on the right path. The walk back to the parking lot was different. The silence was charged now, brimming with unspoken questions and a palpable sense of anticipation. Every time our hands brushed as we navigated a narrow part of the trail, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm. I was acutely aware of him, of the space his body took up next to mine, of the rhythm of his breathing. The world had come alive with sensation. When we reached our cars, an awkwardness descended. The bubble of the woods had burst, and we were back in the real world, with its rules and its uncertainties. "So," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets. "Thanks for the walk." "Thanks for coming," he said. He was leaning against his truck again, watching me with that same intense gaze. He wasn't going to make this easy. He wasn't going to fill the silence. He was waiting for me. He was giving me the space to make a choice. My old self, the Leo of just a few hours ago, would have mumbled a goodbye and fled. He would have retreated to the safety of his silent apartment to overanalyze every word, every look, until the memory was worn smooth and meaningless. But something had shifted in me on that bench. A small, dormant seed of courage had been watered. I took a breath. "I'm making lasagna tonight," I said, the words feeling clumsy and loud in the quiet parking lot. "It's probably going to be terrible. I'm a much better artist than I am a cook." I risked a look at him. "But there's going to be a lot of it." Julian's expression didn't change, but a slow, warm light grew in his eyes. He pushed off the truck and closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stopped just in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. "I like terrible lasagna," he said, his voice a low murmur. He didn't move. He just stood there, searching my face. I could feel the heat coming off his body, see the faint stubble on his jaw, the tiny scar in his eyebrow. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. This was it, the moment of truth. The air was thick with unspoken tension, with the weight of everything that had been building between us since that first day on my porch. He raised a hand, slowly, as if not to startle me. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking the line of it. His hand was calloused and warm, and the touch was electrifying. It was not a touch of comfort or guidance. It was a touch of possession, of intent. "Leo," he whispered, and my name on his lips was a prayer. And then he leaned down and he kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty. It was firm and sure in everything he was. His lips were soft but insistent, moving against mine with a hunger that stole my breath. It was a kiss that spoke of weeks of observation, of unspoken yearning, of a connection that had been forged in silence and small gestures. One of his hands was still cupping my jaw, holding me in place, while the other came to rest on the small of my back, pulling me flush against him. I melted into him. Years of pent-up loneliness, of quiet, aching desire, unraveled in that single moment. I wrapped my arms around his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft hair at his nape, and I kissed him back with a desperation that surprised me. It was messy and real and perfect. It tasted of pine and fresh air and the faint, lingering salt of his skin. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His hand was still on my back, a solid, reassuring weight. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest, or maybe it was mine. I couldn't tell where I ended, and he began. "So," he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. "Lasagna." I let out a shaky laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yeah," I whispered. "Lasagna." The next morning, I woke up alone. For a split second, panic seized me. A cold, familiar dread that told me it had all been a dream, a fabrication of my lonely mind. But then I saw it. A single coffee mug, not mine, sitting by the sink. And next to it, the empty box from the terrible, store-bought lasagna we had eaten on the floor of my living room, laughing until our sides hurt. He had left before I woke up, a quiet retreat that my anxious brain immediately started to misinterpret. He regretted it. It was too fast. I was too broken, too much of a project. I was a fixer-upper, and he was a man who knew how to build things, but maybe he didn't want a project of this magnitude. I spent the morning in a fog of anxiety, pacing my apartment, torturing myself with doubts. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful, it was accusatory. I avoided looking at the new bookcase, at the drawings on the wall. They were all symbols of his influence, and I was terrified that he was already gone. Then I heard it, the familiar hum of the mail truck. 11:42 a.m. On the dot. My heart leaped into my throat. Would he come to the door? Would he just leave the mail and go? Would he pretend nothing had happened? The uncertainty was excruciating. I couldn't bring myself to go to the door. I hid in the kitchen, peering through the sliver of space between the curtains. I saw him walk up the path, his stride as even and unhurried as always. He didn't look toward the house. He opened the mailbox, slid the letters in, and closed it with a soft click. And then he walked away. That was it. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. It was over. It had been a momentary lapse, a kindness that had gone too far. He was retreating back behind the safety of his professional role. I felt a crushing weight of disappointment, a familiar ache of loneliness returning with a vengeance. I waited until the sound of his truck had faded completely before I trudged out to the mailbox. I pulled out the mail, a gas bill, and a catalog. And one other thing. A small, folded piece of paper, not an official letter, with my name, Leo, written on the front in a strong, clear hand. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The note was short, just a few words. Your house looks better with the lights on at night. I start my hike at the same spot. 5 p.m. Come find me. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. He hadn't been retreating. He had been giving me space. He was letting me choose. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding. He was inviting. He was showing me, once again, that he understood the quiet, frightened corners of my heart better than anyone ever had. He knew I needed the choice to be mine. The note was a reassurance, a quiet confirmation in the bright light of day that the night before had been real and true. It was a second test, not of his feelings, but of mine. Was I brave enough to show up a second time? Was I ready to step onto this new path for good? I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity. I didn't work. I cleaned my apartment, scrubbing away the last 2 years of dust and stagnation. I threw open the windows, letting the fresh air chase out the stale silence. I bought groceries. Real groceries, not just the sad, single-serving meals I usually subsisted on. And I took the 2 cream-colored envelopes out of the drawer. I sat at my kitchen table, took a deep breath, and signed them both. My hand didn't even shake. It wasn't an act of defeat anymore. It was an act of liberation. Signing those papers wasn't about ending something with Marcus. It was about starting something for myself. I was closing a door, finally and firmly, so that I could be free to walk through a new one. At 5 o'clock, I was at the reservation. He was there, leaning against his truck, just like the day before. The late afternoon sun lit the dust motes dancing in the air around him. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching me approach, his expression calm and steady. I walked right up to him, my heart beating a strong, even rhythm. I didn't stop until I was standing in front of him. I reached into my bag and pulled out the 2 signed and sealed envelopes. I held them out to him. "Can you mail these for me?" I asked, my voice clear and steady. He looked down at the envelopes in my hand, then back up at my face. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his lips. The smile I was quickly coming to realize I would do just about anything to see. He didn't take the letters. Instead, he reached out and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. His grip was warm and sure. "We can do that tomorrow," he said. "Today, let's just walk." And we did. We walked into the woods, hand in hand, the setting sun casting our 2 long shadows on the path ahead of us. We didn't talk about the past or the future. We just existed in the quiet, perfect present. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was full of promise, of unspoken understanding, of the steady, reassuring weight of his hand in mine. That night, we sat on my porch, the bookcase visible through the open door. We watched the stars come out, a comfortable silence stretching between us. He had his arm around my shoulders, and I was leaning against him, my head resting on his chest. I could feel the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of him a constant, grounding presence. I thought about the man I was just a few weeks ago, a ghost in his own life, hiding from the world behind a locked door. I thought about the simple, profound power of a hand reaching out, not to demand, but to guide. Julian hadn't saved me. He had simply shown me the path and given me the courage to walk it myself. He had shown me how to claim my own life. He shifted, his hand tightening on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into my hair. I tilted my head back to look at him. The faint light from the living room illuminated his face, the strong line of his jaw, the gentleness in his eyes. "I was just thinking," I said, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face, "that my house looks better with the lights on." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, sweet kiss full of promises that didn't need to be spoken. It wasn't a kiss of frantic discovery like the first one, but a kiss of quiet certainty. A kiss that felt like coming home. I was no longer a man defined by an empty signature line. I was here, in this moment, with him. And for the first time, I felt like I had finally signed on for a life I truly wanted to live.